Good evening, everyone here on Zoom and everyone joining us on our live stream on YouTube. I'm Sarah Henry. I'm the city's public information officer. And tonight I'm here to help with the presentation to the subcommittees by the police department about their budget and staffing. Joining us tonight are Interim Police Chief Randy Fenn, who has 30 years of experience as a police officer and 4 years as a police chief. Police Captain Matt McMullen, who's been with APD for 18 years and is currently the operations captain, which includes patrol and investigations. Police Captain Jeff Emmett, who's been with APD for 21 years and works opposite Matt in the Services Bureau. City Manager Eric Levitt has a Public Utilities Board meeting tonight and is unfortunately unable to join us. But here with us tonight is Jerry Bowden, Alameda's Assistant City Manager. And here to answer questions, we also have Maricela Springsteen from the Alameda Police Department, who's a management analyst and has been there for more than 7 years. And she takes care of all the activities related to accounts receivable, accounts payable, and purchasing. She also assists with preparing and managing the budget for APD, as well as grant and contract management. We also have Nancy Bronstein, Alameda's Human Resources Director. Please note that all participants have been muted. Steering committee and subcommittee members can submit questions for our speakers at any time by entering them into the chat tool. We have a hard stop tonight at 8 p.m., but if there are any unanswered questions, we will send responses to the questions to the steering committee. And like I said earlier, we're streaming this meeting live on YouTube, and a recorded version will be posted after the meeting ends. I'd now like to turn things over to Police Chief Randy Fenn.
Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again. I hope that you've all found the first two meetings that we've been involved with informative, and I hope you've gotten to know your police department a little bit better. And I know the conversations, although difficult in this forum, have been rather robust, and we've talked about a lot of issues. We've covered a lot of topics. And I think it's important. I think it's important that you know how your government works and how your police department works. And I think it's important that we stay on our toes and we are accountable to our community, and we're able to provide you information about this important function of government that we serve in the police department. So tonight, we get a little more technical. I don't know, some of this will, for you numbers people, this might be right in your wheelhouse. And so talking about staffing and numbers and budgets and all that. And we have a lot of good people on this call that will help dig through that data. And we look forward to being able to share about police operations with you. And I hope it continues to paint the picture of what it is that we do here in the city of Alameda. So thank you.
Thank you, Chief Fenn. And I am so sorry, Cheryl Taylor. You were supposed to introduce this meeting, not me. I just started talking.
That's quite all right. Quite all right, Sarah. You're such a pro at this, definitely. I just wanted to introduce myself and the other steering committee members for sort of the viewing audience, and talk a little bit about this process. It might be a little bit of a repeat for folks, but just for posterity, we'll say that this is the steering committee for APD, Alameda Police Department reforms. And the mission of our team is to sort of create an Alameda that is welcoming, safe, and supportive for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to live, work, play, and pray, and that we be ever vigilant in practicing the principle that everyone belongs here with respect to BIPOC communities. And so though we recommend action with an eye toward the protection of Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are disproportionately penalized for the color of their skin, we do so securing the knowledge that changes and recommendations that help BIPOC are changes and recommendations that really lift up all marginalized and underrepresented communities within Alameda, including LGBTQ, elderly, disabled, unhoused. So we're dedicated to the goal of ensuring that all Alamedans, people visiting Alameda too, experience the same level of service and professionalism while living, visiting, playing, praying, or existing in our city. So as Sarah was saying, as well as Chief Fenn, central to our exploration is an in-depth look at community stories and data. And so we're so happy to have this conversation tonight, the third in the series that sort of told the story about how policing is resourced, sort of charged in terms of policies and carried out. And so again, tonight, Chief Finn has mentioned that we're going to be kind of getting into those numbers. I did want to introduce the other steering committee members who I don't believe are on the call tonight. There's Al Mance, there's Jolene Wright and Christine Chilcott. We're all Alamedans here, living here for varying, years, of course. And I also want to give a shout out and thank definitely the very, very hard and dedicated work of the subcommittees, all the chairs, all the subcommittee members. The work that they've done to date is humbling, quite frankly. Everybody has I believe everyone has other full-time jobs or full-time endeavors, and I just think it's sort of amazing, sort of the sort of volunteer effort that is really carried out with a lot of professionalism from the volunteers, as well as city staff. Lisa, Sarah, Jerry, there you are, and everyone on the line has just been phenomenal coming to our convenings, after work and on weekends, Sunday morning. So I think that's all I was supposed to do. I think actually I will just say one more thing about our process, which is a process has been one of inquiry. So committees have been meeting as subcommittees and fully as sort of all committees to develop a set of preliminary recommendations that we believe will be presented in December, as well as in sort of later in the winter or early spring. And the sort of speaker series is sort of a part of that inquiry. And we're so happy to have the sort of staffing from the police department throughout administration, as well as members of the public who have been very curious about what we're doing. So I think that was kind of what I was supposed to do. So I think I'll turn it back over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry for that again. I just got too carried away. Okay. So now we're going to hear from Alameda's Assistant City Manager, Jerry Bowden, who's going to give us an overview of the city's budget before we hear from Captain Jeff Emmett, who's going to talk specifically about the police department budget. Jerry?
Great. Thanks very much, Ms. Henry, Ms. Taylor, and Chief Finn. As Ms. Henry noted, our city manager, Eric Levitt, can't be with us tonight. He's got the Public Utilities Board meeting. If it wraps up early, he'll join us. But in the meantime, you get me to give that citywide perspective on staffing and budget before our police department staff really get into the details of that budget. I'm going to be really brief with my remarks, but I just want to echo the comments from Ms. Taylor and my colleagues about the thank you to the steering committee, the subcommittee members, public, city staff, for your contributions and participation, as well as your leadership on this important topic and in this work. The city of Alameda has about 550 full-time employees. That includes about 100 employees with Alameda Municipal Power. The city's general fund budget is about $110 million for 2019-2020. That's the current fiscal year. Not all departments and personnel are funded wholly or in part by the general fund in terms of our city operations. And just for example, there are numerous other funding sources like special funds that account for things like grants and other dedicated funding sources. We have enterprise funds, which include things like Alameda Municipal Power, which is primarily funded by ratepayers. Our base reuse efforts go about their business by generating income from leases and property sales to help pay for the redevelopment and the efforts that are going on at Alameda Point. So of the departments that are primarily funded by the general fund, the police department and the fire department are the largest. They are about equal in terms of their general fund budget allocation. This fiscal year, they accounted for 38% and 36% of the general fund respectively. That's about $35.7 million budgeted for our police department and about $34 million budgeted for the fire department. And I said I'd keep it brief. I'm going to make one last point and then I'll turn it over. There are 88 sworn police positions that are approved at this time, but only 83% of those positions are budgeted for. So if I said that differently, of those 88 positions, not all of them are filled at this time, but if we were to cut 5 positions at this time, that decision would not have any impact on the current budget, the way that it was adopted. And so we did this with the police department and with a few other positions in different departments to help the city balance our budget during the last budget process. I will be available for Q&A throughout the evening, but with that, I'll turn it over to Captain Jeff Emmett to present the specifics on the police department's budget. I don't know if I want to turn it back to Sarah or Jeff at this time, or Captain Emmett at this time, but I'll wrap it.
Captain Emmett is great. Thanks, Jerry. Actually, one person had a question just for following up on what you said, asking if there is a flow chart available. And I was going to just connect to the budget page on the city website. But can you think of anything different? I think the budget in brief would be the most helpful.
It is, yeah. That's where I would go to.
Okay, great. I'll post that in the chat. And Captain Emmett.
Hello. So as the Services Bureau captain, one of the responsibilities that I oversee is the financial side of the police department. And I'm going to go over some brief numbers before I let the real expert, who's Maricela Springsteen, kind of help answer some of the questions. So the fiscal year 2021 budget summary for the police that has been updated through September 30th, which is our period 3 within that fiscal year. We are about, our total operating budget was $36,941,475 for the fiscal year 2021. As Assistant City Manager Bowden talked about, some of that budget was some of those funds were removed earlier this year by the city. When looking at what we would project to be at for the period 3 cycle, which is about 25% of our overall operating budget, our actual percentage right now is about 14.71%, which is about 10.29% below what we expected to be at for this the fiscal year. And that equates to about $3.8 million we expected to be at. So looking at, that's the overall budget. Looking at personnel, again, we expected to be at about 25% of our overall budget. We're at about 13.68% right now. And that puts us at about 11.32% under what we expected to be at, which equates to approximately $3,325,862. And that's personnel related only, under budget. We do have, the way that our budget is set up is there are some fixed line items that we use to help keep track of. Those line items are established from the city's finance department, and those do change from time to time. They ask us to either consolidate or to create new line items of how we can help keep track of our overall budget. And that work is done through the finance department. We also have some grants that we use to help offset some costs. Grants that we have are the state COPS grants, the tobacco code enforcement, the JAG grants, which are run through the county. And then we have an abandoned vehicle abatement grant and narcotics asset and seizure grants. So that's kind of just a breakdown of how we look at our funds and where those funds go to and where we take funds from. And I don't want to talk too much because Maricela Springsteen is definitely our in-house expert, and I leave time as I can for us to answer questions from the community. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Maricela, are you able to unmute yourself?
I unmuted an M. Springsteen. Oh, now she's muted.
There she goes.
Maricela, are you able to hear us? I'm not sure. Maybe what we can do is we can start with some questions. I know that she had a lot of details to explain to us. So I'm not sure if somebody can help her get online. But Jerry, somebody had asked if the 88 officer number reflects the city's action not filling positions in June. Did you want to talk to that?
Sorry, Sarah, there was a dinging right in the middle of your question. Could you just repeat it?
Yeah, no problem. Somebody asked if the 88 officer number reflects the city's action on not filling positions in June, and just wanted your clarification.
So the 88 positions that were discussed were part of prior staffing discussions. The budget was adopted. The 2-year budget was adopted back in 2019. I got to make sure I get my dates right. And so the answer is that number was established before the city council took their action this past June and in the June-July timeframe. And so we have held the positions that we had at that time. And I'm going to have to look to probably Captain Emmett or Chief Fenn to help me with the current number of officers. We have not added officers since council took their action, and the number is far below 88.
Captain Emmett, did you have additional?
So the number I believe that we were at when council took their action back in June was 73. And that is the number that we have been instructed to try to maintain. We dipped down below 73 for a few months there due to some early retirements that were taken. And I believe we are at 72 right now. That full number of 72 would include folks that we have that are off on extended injury leave.
Got it. Thank you. Captain Emmett, this next question is, oh, sorry, did somebody else?
Sorry, sir. I just, he started to kind of allude to it, and I think this might help going forward, is when you look at the number of, so we look at full-time employees, right? And then we also look at sworn police officer positions. So our current contingent is 105 full-time employees. 73 of those 105 are sworn police officers. And that's everyone from me as the chief of police to the 3 officers we have currently that we just hired and swore in earlier this month. So that's the range there. And when we talk about those 73, unfortunately, not all 73 are deployable, if you will, into the street because, or to patrol duties or what have you, because we do have things like people out on disability and other things that keep them from being able to, again, do their job right now or do the job as a full-time police officer. So it starts to get nebulous when you talk about those numbers, but I just kind of want to frame that a little bit because those are important numbers to remember. And if we have 8 or 9 people out and you take that away from 73, and then of course you include in people that aren't ready for solo patrol, like our 3 new officers aren't ready for solo patrol, and people like Captain Emmett, Captain McMullen, and I, we could do it, but that's not our primary job. So I just, again, want to give a little context of what the numbers are.
Great, thank you.
And if I could just add the one last comment to the chief's point of the 3 in FTO and the field training. We had spoke about this before, but just to put in context what 19 weeks looks like, that puts us in sometime around, I want to say the first week of April of next year. So until that time, those officers, although they are counted on our staffing, will be in some type of a training format and will not be by themselves patrolling as a solo patrol officer, if that helps with the context.
That's great. Thank you, Matt. Next question is for you, Captain Emmett. Somebody asked, how do mutual aid support calls get funded when our officers go to other jurisdictions and when other officers come to Alameda for a mutual aid event? How is that reflected in the budget?
So mutual aid is an agreement that all of the cities in the county have entered into, and through mutual aid call, which means there's been no pre-planning or prior meetings that have taken place to the mutual aid call going out. Each individual city is responsible for their employees during that mutual aid call. So if we were requested to go to the city of Oakland for a mutual aid call, the city of Alameda would pay our employees during their deployment for the mutual aid. If we asked for resources to come into our city, the city of Alameda would not be on the hook for paying for those resources. It would fall to the individual agencies or cities that responded to assist us.
Got it. Thank you.
And one additional point to that is that there are some times, for instance, when a statewide or a federal emergency has been declared, such as the wildfires. So if we send earlier this year to the LNU complex fire, if we send a contingent of officers to help mutual aid in Napa County, place like that, there is reimbursement because the state reimburses and they're also being reimbursed through the federal government. So there is one exception to that, but otherwise what Captain Emmett described is generally the case for law enforcement mutual aid.
A follow-up back to the number of the 88 number. This person asks, is 88 the number of sworn officers or does it include dispatchers, parking enforcement, animal control?
Sworn officers.
Okay. The next question is, will the grants mentioned make up the budget difference for fiscal year 2021? I think to you, Captain Emmett.
So there shouldn't be anywhere that we have to make up a budget shortfall. I believe right now, like I said earlier, the city actually took about, I want to say it was about $1.2 million out of our budget earlier this year to help offset some other challenges that the city was facing. So I don't think we're going to have any shortcomings. And then the grants that we receive, some of them are specific as to what you can use the funds for. So the grants that we have from the state of California for tobacco education and enforcement, that grant money has to be used for those things, for whether it's education, posting signs throughout school districts, businesses with literature that can be distributed at their business, or if it's using officers on an overtime basis for enforcement type action. The state, some of the other state funding you can use for equipment. Some of it you can use for personnel costs. The JAG grant funding is pretty specific, where you actually have to come up with equipment that needs to be purchased during that fiscal year prior to being submitted and approved by the county. And if you are to change your request, you have to actually put a change order through the county and get approval before you would be able to use those funds for something else. So historically, grant funding has been used for equipment type purchases for the city, not necessarily being used for budget or personnel cost.
Great. Thank you. And Maricela Springsteen, I think, is now able to join us on audio, not video. But Maricela, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, terrific. Great. Thank you. Well, welcome. We were just talking about grants, your specialty. I don't know if you wanted to give a brief overview of the work that you do, but the floor is yours.
Okay, so I've been with the city for over 7 years, and my role here is to assist the chief, captains, lieutenants, and everyone else in the department with anything that has anything to do with our funds, including budget preparation, grants, management, contracts, things like that. So I provide support for upper management. I believe Captain Emmett summarized pretty well our budget. So I'm here to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great. And yeah, the next question is actually following up on what you were saying. Captain Emmett, somebody asked what portion of the $36 million is grants?
So the $36 million is what is funded through the city from the general fund. That does not include grants.
Okay, got it. And then here's another question. Could a mutual aid or other contract agreement allow Alameda to save money on certain emergency services, namely SWAT? What would be the downside, and what percentage of the budget is 1.2 million?
I think maybe we'll break that up just a little bit. If I can talk about some of those emergency services while somebody's doing some math on what the percentage is of 1.2 million. You know, I think it's important to recognize that one of the things that's unique about the United States and law enforcement in the United States is that it is decentralized in terms of its policing. We don't have a national police force. We don't have a state police force. Yes, we have the California Highway Patrol, but they don't, there's not a community where they are the primary law enforcement responders. So localized control of law enforcement is a hallmark of our country and policing in the United States. So that doesn't mean we don't enter into agreements or can't enter into agreements or find more efficient ways to deliver policing services or emergency services in general. But one thing we always want to bear in mind is that local control is an important component of what we do, and that each community is unique. And part of this process that we're going through in general is to ensure that the Alameda Police Department delivers services that meets the need of the Alameda community. And when you bring in outside police departments and resources, you run the risk of bringing in folks that you know, don't necessarily police or meet the needs of this individual community. That's not to say we wouldn't need them in an emergency or that they couldn't supplement us, but over the long term, it's about us meeting the needs of the local community. So I think that's important when we look at, again, I think government, we have a responsibility to be good stewards with the public's money, that we look for opportunities to be more efficient, to look for ways to improve service delivery. But I want that to be the backdrop as we make those decisions, that is an important component in the decision-making matrix.
Thank you. Captain Emmett, two follow-up questions with regards to grants. One is how much grant money do we have? And then what types of equipment do we purchase with these grants?
So the equipment, I'll tackle the equipment one first, and I'll have Maricela look at the exact numbers for what we have left with our grant funding. But the equipment can vary. It can be computers that are needed for desktop workstations. They can be computers that are needed for the patrol vehicles. Can be for office equipment. You know, if we had to replace or refurbish workstations. You know, the ergonomic assessments have been pretty popular in the last few years, and we're doing the best that we can to ensure that our employees are as comfortable as they can be while they're at their workstations. We could use the grant funding for that. We have used the grant funding most recently to offset the purchase of a new patrol boat that our Marine Patrol unit will be using. We can use it for, you know, pretty much anything that you see the police officers using, whether it be ballistic shields that we would put inside of the patrol cars for the patrol supervisors to have access to. It could be to upgrade and replace current equipment that we have. If there was some type of body camera equipment that we needed to use or to upgrade, we could use it for that. Basically for any type of equipment that you see us using now.
Great, thank you. And Maricela, did you want to talk to the total amount of grant money that we have?
So far, we have some grants that carry over if we don't spend all the funds. So our balance on grants is from last or prior years is $366,427, and this year, as of now, we have received $5,690,000. So total right now we have $372,117 in grants.
Great, thank you.
And to add to what Captain Emmett was saying, one of the biggest expenses that we have, or we used to have for grants, is purchasing equipment for vehicles. Sometimes when we purchase a new vehicle to replace an old one, the equipment needs to be updated. So we used to use grant funds to make sure that the vehicles were well equipped. Because sometimes the budget that is provided is not enough, so then we use grant funds to make sure that all the equipment is appropriate.
Great, thank you. Next question, and I see that Captain Emmett has maybe stepped away, so maybe this will be for the chief. Are police pension funds covered in the police budget?
Yes, it's part of the personnel costs. So I can let Jerry speak more specifically to how that's done. But yes, when we look at the personnel costs of every employee, it's the whole thing from their salary to benefits and all of that.
Yeah, what I would say to that is, if you're a general fund position, we do have pension obligations and other post-employment benefits that are funded, and that happens across the city. It's not just police officers, but all general funded positions. We are carrying those costs and accounting for them in the budget.
Great, thank you. Next question is a clarification on SWAT, which we were talking about earlier. This person has asked how much the city pays to have a SWAT team available. Is that cost the $1.2 million, or is it a different cost?
It's not the $1,285,000 that was removed from our budget back in March, I believe. The cost for the SWAT team, most of that is going to be absorbed through overtime costs for training, but there's really no other cost that is set aside for that specifically.
Great, thanks. This is a big picture question. How has APD staffing changed over the past 20, 30 years in terms of the levels of service?
I can start, and then maybe Captain McMullen can chime in since he's been here almost as long as I have. I'll start off by saying our service levels, even though our staffing has been reduced over the years, I don't believe our service has reduced at all. We still respond to every single call that comes in to the police department. We still investigate every single call that may potentially be a crime, and we follow up on those crimes. And as far as some of the other things that we have lost over the years, I don't believe that they have a direct impact to the service that we're providing to the community. Back in 2012, when we had to close our jail due to budget cuts, it didn't stop us from providing a level of service. We just had to find a new way of, where do we take our in custodies to now, because they can't go to our jail. We still have an animal control officer that is available for calls 4 days a week. We do have a part-time animal control position that's open. And and that we've been trying to fill. And that's been a little difficult, but the city is still trying to fill that position. When we started contracting with FOZ, we were looking for a more financially responsible way of providing that service to the city, which the police department still funds the FOZ. And I will say every time we reduced our sworn staffing, we absorbed whatever shortcomings those cuts were going to bring into the staff that we had left. And from my standpoint, I don't think our services have reduced. I think they've stayed the same. And I think that's a pretty huge testament to the type of employees that we bring in here to the Alameda Police Department. Even though that we've gone from 111 or 112 sworn police officers back in 1999 when I started working for the city, down to, I know it says 88, but we haven't been at 88 in many, many years. We're still providing that high level of service that I think the citizens are looking for.
Captain McMullen, did you want to?
I'll add just a little bit. I think Captain Emmett did a marvelous job of covering most all of it. And I'm certainly happy he brought up the jail, since that was a huge shift in the way we operate, having the ability to bring an in custody straight to our city jail and then go back into service in short order was a monumental change in the way we've done things. And since then, the closure of the North County Jail over in Oakland has also changed. I will add that we still provide the same level of service, but there are some nice to haves that I think have been eliminated. I know that 20 years ago when I was on the boat patrol, we were able to deploy the boat resource out a little bit more frequently than we are now. I had the pleasure of supervising foot patrol on Park and Webster Streets that have also had to go by the wayside as employee numbers have waned. But we try to keep the backbone of our policing in patrol at least sustainable, in the sense of when you call the police, as Captain Emmett had mentioned in our previous meeting, regardless of the severity, that we try to send someone as expeditiously as possible. There has been some impacts to those just because you can only shuffle employee resources so much, and that's something that continues to evolve. I will say that we're trying to leverage technology. 20 years ago, we didn't have online police reports, and now we do. And we're trying to keep up with the times by leveraging things such as the internet and other resources and technologies to help continue to provide the level of service that Alamedans have come to expect and deserve.
Great, thank you.
And then Sarah, I just maybe to kind of close the loop a little bit about some of the services that we no longer have and have absorbed into other. Like Captain McMullen mentioned, we used to have walking beats in the business districts. We used to have a bike patrol that was out on the weekends, active in the business district communities, even working the nighttime and out in the neighborhoods riding bicycles. We can't do that anymore because we need to make sure that we have enough personnel that's available for priority one calls for service that come in. When I started working for the police department, we had a youth services unit that was in our investigations division that was staffed by a supervisor and 2 detectives that dealt strictly with the youth cases that would come in for investigation. We also had the SROs that were out of that youth services section. We had a few different branches of our investigations division, units that we have had to collapse over the years. And we've really had to shrink our investigations division personnel, going from about anywhere from 15 to 18 detectives and 4 or 5 supervisors down to 2 supervisors and 1 detective right now. for our investigations division. We're trying to, do some things to shuffle some pieces, but when you're talking about 72 or 73 people that you can work with, and 6 or 7 of those that are out for various reasons, and then another 6 or 7 that are really not assigned to, I'll say, do police work because of the positions they're in, shuffling those pieces becomes very difficult. When I was a young patrol officer working on the west end of town, I had a specific beat or a neighborhood that was assigned to me. And part of my job as a patrol officer was to get to know the neighbors who lived in that beat, to get to know the shop owners who lived in that beat. And when you had, I think back at the time, almost 60 police officers that were assigned specifically to patrol, you can do that type of stuff. You can be out of your cars. You can be walking through the community, through the neighborhoods a little bit more than you can when you have 5 cops that are working the street answering priority 1 calls for service. So again, I like to think our level of service hasn't changed because we have a bunch of dedicated men and women who are out there every day doing the job. But we definitely have had some things shift on us over the 21 years since I've been here.
Thank you, Captain Emmett. Next question, I think, is for Assistant City Manager Jerry Bowden. How have APD retiree pensions impacted the City of Alameda's budget?
It's really hard to split the hair on APD pensions versus the rest of city pensions. Pension obligations for all city employees who are funded by the general fund are significant. They're a significant impact, a significant factor for us to have to deal with. I don't have the split on the police department's pension obligations versus other public employees at this point in time. We can certainly break that down, but I would say that the numbers and the cost factors are significant for public safety and for non-public safety staff when it comes to pension obligations.
Thank you. Next question is, where are the funds accounted for that businesses and organizations have paid for police services in the budget? I think that's for you, Captain Emmett.
I'm trying to figure out what they're referring to. We have a program that's called contract overtime, that if a private business is looking for additional services from the police department, that they are able to hire on an hourly basis officers from our department that will work for that private business. This year we've had, I think, maybe 1 or 2 contract overtime requests. On an average year, we may receive somewhere between 25 to 30. And most of those are, like almost private security for like the Antiques Fair. If one of the schools within our school district felt that they wanted to have a police officer present at a sporting event or something like that. But those numbers are relatively low. And I wouldn't say that it would generate enough revenue for it to fund, we'll say a fully burdened police officer or anything like that.
Okay.
And Mary Stella might have some numbers on those. I don't know if she has access to those right now, but
I'm not convinced that was the question though, based on it seemed almost more like a tax question, or am I wrong, Sarah?
I think that was it. That was how I understood. I was
Okay.
thinking about the outside organizations that pay sometimes the PD for their services. Just where are those in the budget? That was how I understood it.
Okay, my mistake. So then, as again, Captain Emmett described, we're just looking to break even there, right? Because that's the goal.
Maricela, did you have?
Yeah, basically it's not really revenue generating activity because the officers are being paid out of that revenue. But as far as numbers, this year we don't really have anything because of COVID. No activities are going on. But like last year, let's see. At the end of the year, we generated about 70,000, which is pretty much for their salaries and benefits of those officers that went out and worked those hours.
Great. Jerry, this is just a request to obtain the pension amounts for public safety employees versus non-public safety employees and to get that information over to the subcommittee. So we can do that after. And then next question is, can you remind us what the numbers are for each shift during the day for active officers, patrol, supervision of patrol, et cetera, to respond to calls?
Are we talking about deployment of actual police officers during certain hours of the day?
That's what yeah. So for each shift, so when there's a new
Okay.
shift, what are the numbers of officers, patrol, supervision, et cetera?
I'll try to tackle this the best I can off the top of my head. And if I get it wrong, someone can correct me. Typically during our base minimum is 5. During the day, between the hours of 7 and 11, it's typically 5. From 11 to 21:30 or 9:30 p.m., that number jumps from 7 to 8, depending on the day of the week. That number continues to remain there until before COVID, the bars closed. And then from 2:45 in the morning to 7, it drops down to 5 again. So in essence, it's 5, 7 or 8, and then back to 5 in a 24-hour period. Those are our bare bones minimums that will likely change in the near future as we look to possibly reallocate some resources to better serve the community.
And just to clarify, the 5 that Captain McMullen's talking about is the officer rank. At 24/7, 365, we have a patrol supervisor or a patrol sergeant that is always on duty. We never leave the city without a supervisory level employee at any time of the day. So that 5 to 7 or maybe 8, that is the officer rank. And then there would be at least one patrol sergeant who would be working at that time as well.
Thank you. And 2 follow-up questions to the question before. The first is asking if contract overtime, if the rate is grossed up for Social Security. And then the second is asking, why doesn't the city make this a revenue generating activity, like charging a little bit more so that it does generate revenues? Chief, I don't know if you wanted to start with that one.
Well, my experience has been, again, it's an endeavor to try to just break even. It's expensive for one, and there is a benefit to the city, because if a venue has to hire some form of security, and they've come to that point where they believe they need security, we know that by having trained, uniformed police officers carrying our radio, ability to communicate with us, enhances public safety across the board. The danger is if you make that so expensive that, because we're trying to generate funds, that's an extra burden on the business, on the citizen, and they're more likely then to maybe undercut their security a little bit and hire, something less than a police officer. So everywhere I've been, it's been a balancing act of, again, many times a special event is run by a nonprofit and they're trying to maximize profits, but what we want to ensure that they do it safely. So that's kind of the tact we take coming into it. And then there's just not enough of them, even in a non-COVID year. And I think Maricela can tell us that even at, say, 25, 30 special events for an entire year, it's just not going to generate a bunch of revenue.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the rates that we charge for contract overtime are set by the city finance department, not set by the police department.
Okay, and then so maybe it's a question then for Assistant City Manager Jerry Bowden. Those rates would include the pension costs and Social Security and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I think that Chief Fenn's comments in terms of trying to cost recover is our goal for many services. There are actually legal limitations as well on what the city can do in terms of charging fees for services. We are a public entity. We're not in the business of making money. Under most circumstances, we're here to provide a public service, and that's sometimes a hard message to deliver when we have all of these demands for these services. I just actually I've been in touch with the city attorney's office to see if I can get a response. We don't have a city attorney with us tonight, but I'm curious about whether or not these fees in particular are limited like our building fees. We don't charge more than it costs to deliver the services for building and planning services and for recreation services. And I think this may also be one of those services that where our goal is to break even, best case scenario.
Great.
Sarah, I'm sorry, if I could just add
please.
one last thing about contract overtime. We have to have the personnel that's available to work the contract overtime to fill those spots. And that has become increasingly difficult over the last few years with the reduction of our workforce. We've had to tell private businesses that we're unable to fulfill their requests because we already had, an entire patrol team that was working overtime to cover our day-to-day operations. So contract overtime, there's quite a few of challenges that we face. And one of those more recent challenges that we've had is actually being able to fulfill those requests.
Great. Next question is asking, how many officers on the payroll live here in Alameda?
Don't know.
Human Resources Director Nancy Bronstein, do we have access to that kind of information?
No, I don't have it in front of me. It's something I could get and we could send out, though.
Okay.
Provide.
That'd be great. Next question is related. The first question is asking Captain Emmett how many supervisor level positions there are, and then how many of those positions at the supervisor level are filled by people of color and also filled by women.
So I know that we have 15 supervisor positions, sergeant rank positions. I believe 2 females. And I don't want to take a guess about what someone is referring to by someone of color. I don't, maybe if they had more specifics, like if they're looking for the breakdown of the entire department, I think we have that information that HR can provide.
I think non-white would be helpful.
Okay. Maybe
Nancy, is that something
our director Bronstein could help answer that part of the question?
Yeah, I can give you the overall numbers. I don't have sergeants. I'm just looking to see within our. I may start with overall, and then I can see if I can provide it at the lower level. What I can say is 52% of the department does identify as white, and then the rest identify in other categories. And then of our leadership, which would be lieutenants and captains, but that group, we are missing some people. I don't see any demographic there. It's this time our lieutenants and captains are male, who identify as white, Caucasian. And I don't have any deeper information than that, any more detail at the next level for Psyche.
Okay. Great. So next question is, I think for you, Captain Emmett, maybe for Chief, how do you decide how many officers respond to a given call, and how has that been affected by budget cuts?
Actually, maybe Captain McMullen would be best as the operations captain.
Yeah, so I think we spoke briefly about this in another meeting, but just to reiterate, the type of call typically drives our response. A call that has a high propensity for violence or conflict typically will get at least 2 officers. Other incidents may get 2 officers and a supervisor, and other calls that have a low propensity or a low likelihood of conflict, such as someone calling to report a cold crime or a crime that occurred that is no longer occurring, will likely get a response of 1 patrol officer. And that ends up being part of the triage system that our wonderful communication center or dispatch play in the role of policing. As we had mentioned before, the jails, if 1 officer of our 5 is out at Santa Rita Jail, which is in Dublin, California, and we only have 4, and then 2 are on another call, that only leaves us with 2 more. And sometimes we have multiple things going on in the city. And so they have to triage and decide if it's safe to send an officer. And other times they will do what they call a tone alert, which they notify all officers on the street that a priority call is coming out, a crime in progress is occurring, and that we need to free up some patrol officers, whether they're on a call where they can momentarily pause their investigation if nothing's going on there and respond to the call for service and then return later. Sometimes they'll be on a traffic stop and they'll tell the violator that they're getting a warning and then break from that call or whatnot. But it's a triage thing, and typically it's based on the call for service that we're receiving. If there's a high propensity of violence, we always send at least 2, but sometimes if we have a different call for service where there's multiple people involved, sometimes they'll send more.
Great, thank you.
Sarah, can I jump
Please.
in for just a second? Yeah. So, with all due respect to my my 2 colleagues, because they're proud of their longtime service to this community and the work that they do with the police department, and I completely appreciate and understand that. So when you ask them about reduction of service level, they take it as a badge of honor. No, we haven't reduced service level, and they're right that they still work very hard to deliver services. But I think it's important, and I can tell you as an outsider here, this police department runs very, very lean. That they still do a lot here. They do a lot of provide a lot of service to the community, but they do so at very minimal staffing levels. When I got here and when I learned about, we've talked about in the public, the number of shootings that have occurred and some of the other things. And when I look at the staffing levels in the detective division, I'm frankly a little bit amazed, and we're working to rectify that right now. But unfortunately, that's going to cause us to shift some resources away from patrol. And when you shift away from patrol in a municipal police department, you're gambling in the sense that you're hoping that you don't have so many calls for service that you're not going to end up in a position where we're not able to still deliver a high level of not only high level service, but rapid response. Because what Captain McMullen's talking about in this triage situation, if the staffing level gets so low that there's only 1 officer available, for instance, on the street, we have to be very careful about sending that officer solo into a call for service until there's another officer to go with them. And you may ask, well, why is that? But just like there's Cal OSHA standards for firefighters, firefighters cannot go into a building that's on fire until there are 4 firefighters on scene. That is an OSHA standard. And we don't have an OSHA standard per se in terms of sending in police officers, but best practices suggest and officer safety suggests that we need to have a minimum number of officers on scene. Otherwise, we're going to contribute to the problem by not having proper and adequate staffing going into a call. And not to mention, we want more than 1 officer responding because it's also safer for the community. So I just want to kind of, again, give some context to it all. Yes, the service, I'm amazed at how service oriented this police department is, and I'm gratified by that. And it's a great community here. But the staffing level is very, very lean. And so as this process moves forward and looking at service delivery going forward and what it is that the community expects of the police department, this has to be a constant part of this conversation of, okay, If we want them to continue to do this, what does it take for us to get there? What does it take to make sure that our officers are able to get out of the car, engage the community, do true community policing? Because I will tell you that true community policing is resource intensive and it's labor intensive, because you have to have enough cops to not only cover calls for service, but to get out and engage the community as well.
Thank you. I think the next question is either for Captain Emmett or our city or our Human Resources Director, Nancy Bronstein. The question is, how many police officers have been hired since the City Council imposed a hiring freeze? And a follow-up to that is, when was the most recent time a police officer was hired by APD, and then asking if it was a new trainee or a lateral? And I think the chief talked about some new hires before, but this is a more specific question.
And I don't know if maybe Jeff or Matt have a little more detail. We had not done any hiring for a while once the freeze was put into place. And we recently hired, and they may know the number a little better, I think three new hires to go to the academy. So they still have to be in the academy. It will take them 6 months before they come back to the police department. Is that correct, Captain Emmett? Do I have the number right that we are doing that hiring?
Correct. Since June, we have hired 3 people that we have put into a police academy.
Thank you. Another question: what was the total
Sarah,
cost of?
can I just jump?
Yes. Uh-huh.
I just want to make sure that it's clear, though, that those are trying to maintain the 73 number that Chief Fenn had mentioned earlier. There have been no additional hires. There's been a freeze in terms of not going above a certain number, but we've tried to maintain staffing essentially.
Thanks, Jerry. What was the total cost of officer training paid by APD in 2018 and 2019? I don't know if Maricela has those numbers. And then there's a few follow-ups. How much was spent per officer? How many hours were spent in total? How many per officer? And how much training was required by state or local law, and how much was not required?
Okay. I can provide a total amount that we spend in training, but I do not have the spend per officer in front of me, because personnel training takes care of that, of enrolling the officers into the training. But fiscal year 17-18, we spent $88,737, and in 18-19, we spent $63,400 in training for officers.
And then the other question, I don't know if you have this or if maybe this is for Captain Emmett, but how many hours of training did that equal?
So that is going to vary depending on what the officers are assigned to. And I think we talked about this a couple of times at some of the other meetings, where each officer has the basic minimum requirements that are mandated to meet through post, which is on a 24-month training cycle. And then if you're assigned as a Marine Patrol officer, you have to go to a post-approved Marine Patrol school. If you're a defensive tactics instructor, you have to go to a post-approved DTAC instructor school. And we talked about some of the hours, I believe, at the last, where some of the DTAC instructor schools, before you can teach in a class, you're going through 120 additional hours of training. But again, each of those positions, it's going to vary. Your brand new patrol officer who just graduated the academy and completed our field training program, most of them do not have specialty training that they need to attend. They are not field training officers. They're not field evidence technicians. They're not bike patrol officers. They're not defensive tactics instructors or firearms instructors or report writing instructors. They're just still learning how to do the job of a police officer. So most of their training is going to be relegated to that 24-month post-training cycle, which is, again, I think we talked about this at the first meeting, where there's the 4 perishable skills that post has laid out for every single police officer that has to go through training every 24 months. That's firearms proficiency, driving proficiency, defensive tactics proficiency, and then crisis communications proficiency. So depending on who the officer is, where they're at in their career, what ancillary duties they have, that number of hours of training will vary quite differently.
Thank you. Next question, I think maybe for Maricela. How many hours of overtime were paid in 2018 and 2019 to sworn police officers? And then maybe more for Maricela, or maybe for Captain Emmett, under what conditions are officers paid overtime, and why does training result in the overtime of sworn police officers? Maricela, do you have the first one?
I have total amounts, but I do not have it broken down by hours. I don't know if Nancy will have that.
I wouldn't have the hours. It's a report we have to run.
Yeah.
But we certainly could run hours. It's just each person's hourly rate is different, so it's not as simple as just doing the division.
Okay, yeah, I think it sounds like it would be helpful to run that. And then Captain Emmett, did you want to talk about why an officer would be paid overtime and why training would result in overtime?
Sure. So first, it's important to mention that sometimes our officers are unable to attend training because we don't have the staffing to send them to training. We are required to make sure that we have adequate staffing to handle priority calls for service. So that is always a balance that we are trying to weigh. You know, do we have the staffing available to send Officer X to this training that we would like to get them to? So overtime can result in a few different ways. One can be because we don't have the minimum number of staffing that's required to make sure that the city is adequately staffed so that we can try to keep the citizens as safe as we possibly can. We will fill those vacant spots with overtime. It is on a voluntary basis most of the time. There are times when we are forcing our employees to either stay late or to come in early. Thankfully, we try to avoid as much as we possibly can of pulling pulling employees from their days off. But we do that as well sometimes because our staffing, is somewhat strained right now. When we do send people to training, and we're trying to maintain that minimum staffing level for patrol out on the street, we will backfill that with overtime. You can, run the numbers, I think, a couple of different ways, but unfortunately, I think sometimes, we as cities recognize that it's sometimes cheaper to fill vacant positions with overtime than it is with a fully funded full-time employee. And those are the decisions that we are constantly looking at. And we definitely, when it comes to patrol, we are not looking to drop below what that minimum number is to keep the streets as safe as we possibly can. We will let some other positions go and not backfill with overtime if we have an investigator that is attending a training class. We will not backfill their position because they are not impacting the priority one calls for service that we're trying to maintain.
And if I can, Sarah, just add from an operational standpoint, other times where overtime is absolutely required. I remember as a young police officer working the midnight shift, sometimes cops are called to court, and court doesn't work at night. And so in the middle of your rest, you have to get up and go and attend court. We also can't work our police officers 24/7. So in those times, that a person who typically would work at night is called to court. Sometimes we need to call in others to fill the shift so they can go home and at least sleep a little bit before we put them in a patrol car and ask them to continue to police the city during the nighttime hours. Furthermore, I will add that at times, although not connected to training, we don't get to dictate when crime occurs. Sometimes it's 5 minutes before you're supposed to go home and celebrate your family's birthday or whatnot, and a call comes out and you're required to go. We expect our police officers to handle the call in its entirety. Whether it's scene security, evidence collection, or writing those police reports as dictated by law, to ensure that the person, if there's an arrest, gets due process and the paperwork is completed so they could be arraigned, so on and so forth. There are lots of times that overtime becomes an issue. We would hate for any of our officers to show up and say, sorry, I have to go home. That's not acceptable. They have to stay and maintain the scene and their investigation through its entirety, regardless if it's 2 seconds before they're supposed to get off shift or at the very beginning and the overtime, as I indicated before.
And if I can just add one last thing, police officers are people too, and they are afforded some vacation time through the wonderful city of Alameda, and we have to afford that that vacation time to them. And we do the best that we can to find that between keeping our employees happy and healthy versus meeting the needs that are required of the department. And sometimes that means letting people go on vacation and then having to hold other employees over on overtime to make sure that we meet those minimum staffing requirements.
Thank you, Captain Emmett. The next are 2 requests for information to the subcommittee that hopefully you can commit to and we can get back to folks on for you and for Maricela. The first is asking, please provide to the committee a breakdown of any and all costs associated with the armored vehicle paid since June, since when the City Council voted to sell. This includes storage, maintenance, and repairs. Is that something we can get to them?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, there's no cost for storage. There's been no cost for repairs. They have been a standard service that needed to, like an oil change, that needed to occur between now and June, this past June. And that maintenance would have been completed by our Fleet Service Center. That's by the city, but I can find out what those exact numbers are.
Okay, that'd be great. And then the other is, can you please provide to the subcommittees information on the average annual cost per employee for sworn officers, non-sworn staff, assistants, parking techs, for example, and dispatch staff? I don't know if you have that available, Nancy, or if that's something we'd have to get back to folks on.
I think the question was that the cost of those positions.
Exactly.
We prepared police officer for tonight, but we don't have the others, but that's certainly something that we can provide.
Okay, great. I think, if we can just get that to
people in writing, we can send that out.
Great. Next, I think is a question maybe for Maricela. Does APD or the city prepare cost accounting reports or other analysis which indicates the cost of certain overhead expenses by officer or by the department? And then if yes, can we get that information to the committee? And if no, what method does the department use to adequately budget for vehicles, uniforms, dispatch, and other shared resources?
Actually, the city finance department, they prepares a cost analysis to determine how much they are going to charge each department for fixed charges. So that is something that the city does for all of the departments.
Okay, and then so is that something that we could get to the committees? The cost, that analysis?
Yes, it is.
We can definitely get it from finance.
Terrific.
Yeah, we have internal service funds, vehicle replacement funds. All of our inventories are monitored and tracked, and we can certainly provide that information for the police department.
Great, that's wonderful. And then the next question is also asking for information. Can we please provide to the committee detailed account level budget information for the 2019 and 2018 fiscal years? The subcommittee has requested this information and has received publicly available information, but that's not that detailed.
Yes, we can provide a more detailed report.
Okay, terrific.
Yeah, we'll just consult with the city attorney's office prior to and just make sure that there's all the information is good to go prior to release, but we would have no problem doing that.
Great. Next question, has the city looked at all at the cost of implementing a Kahoot style program in Alameda? Has the city looked at whether it would be cost effective to have some calls responded to by non-uniform officers? For example, is it cost effective to have vector control as animal control person on 24-hour call so that the police don't have to respond to a possum in the attic call at 3 a.m.? I don't know who wants this one, but it's available.
Well, I think that's part of this process, right? I don't know that anybody in the police department yet has broken down the costs again of say implementing the Cahoots program. And again, like I mentioned, I think in the last meeting, part of this is what services are available in the community or in the region that we could contract or turn over that responsibility to. So it's certainly not a lack of interest or I think I mentioned last time, I certainly don't think that we're sitting here trying to hoard services like only we can do it. It's just a lot of this has fallen to us. So I think as we move forward, it'll have to be a conversation of a couple of things. One, what's available to us in terms of services, what those services would cost, and then what is the opportunity for savings, efficiencies, and those kinds of things within the police department. So all of those things kind of have to be considered moving forward. And then of course, there's always this complicated thing we call the law that makes some of these things, for instance, we've talked a lot about mental health and the 5150 of the Welfare and Institutions Code, which, you know, the term 5150 gets thrown around a lot, but basically that is our legal authority to detain someone and take them for mental health treatment if they're a danger to themselves or somebody else. The law is very specific that only a peace officer has the authority to make such a detention. So there are some limitations as well. So as this entire process goes forward, we just have to take all of those things into consideration.
Jerry, can you add on to that with regards to the Cahoots program?
Yeah, I mean, we started doing research when the topic came to the city council earlier this year. We looked at Cahoots. There are some pilot programs. There's a program, I can't remember the acronym. Don't hold my feet too close to the fire on this, but it's Macro. Oakland is trying it. It's based on Cahoots. There are other examples that are happening in San Mateo County with respect to partnerships with EMT and county health. And so we started looking at a number of options, and then the public process, the steering committee started their work. And so we've shared this information, and we expect there to be that robust conversation happening there. I think as Chief Fenn has mentioned on prior calls, there are some limiting factors. There's the law, but there's also just the support network that goes with Cahoots. It's very different, the Oregon model. And so I think Oakland has tried to adapt that with their Macro program to the services that are available here in Alameda County. But it is something that we are looking forward to hearing the steering committee's input on, and we're certainly open to discussing options. As Chief Fenn mentioned, our police department has been asked to respond to a lot of these things, but it's not something that we're married to in the long term, and certainly open to options.
Great, thank you. Next question is about the kind of allocation of officers the department puts out into the community. The question is, how many sectors are covered by a sworn officer at any one time? Have the number of sectors changed over time to address the reduction of sworn officers? And do officers get assigned to the same sector in order to get to know the neighborhood better?
I'll do my best to tackle that. In the city of Alameda, we have 5 sectors. That's no coincidence that our minimum staffing is 5. From Bay Farm Island to Sector 3, which is the east side of the town, Sector 2, which is the middle, Sector 1, which is west, and then Sector 5, which is the retired Navy base in essence, and incorporates it a little bit more. So there's always one in each beat. Now, with that said, and I'm not trying to beat the dead horse, but if that officer makes an arrest or is obligated to leave the city for whatever reason, sometimes that would have to get covered by somebody else. We try, whenever possible, we'll double people up in sectors. So sometimes certain sectors will have 2 officers at any given point, but the minimum is 1. And in my 20 years, it's been the 5 sectors, as I have just outlined, and the minimum of 5. I hope I covered all the questions. Was there something else in there that I might have missed?
I think that's good. Yeah.
I can add about the officers being assigned to the same sector. Used to be the case going back 15 plus years ago, when we had adequate staffing to, even if somebody called in sick or was on vacation, where we would have some additional resources where you could be left in the same sector or beat that you would typically work in. Now it's a little more difficult, especially when you have officers filling in overtime shifts, either at the beginning or the end. If you're typically assigned to work the east end of town and you start work typically at 11:30 in the morning, but you had to come in early at 7 in the morning to cover somebody else's shift, there might be someone else who usually works the east end of town and you'll have to go work somewhere else. So not as easy to do as it was, like I said, 15 plus years ago. And what was nice with the staffing levels that we had back then was, even if, say if Captain McMullen and I were what we would call sector partners, and he was tied up on a call, I would still be available to answer priority 1 calls for service, but to also go talk to the folks who lived in my beat on a more regular basis, because I wasn't tied up on calls for 10 hours like some of our cops are now. So there was more flexibility in being able to have more dedicated resources to some of the things that we used to have.
Great, thank you. We talked about the amount of money that the department spends on training earlier, but this question is asking, who is that paid to? How much of it is grant funded and how much is taxpayer funded?
Well, most grant funds are in fact taxpayer funds, because most grants are just through other government entities. I just want to make sure that that's clear. It's usually from either the state or from the federal government. Rarely do we get private sector grants. I can't even think of the last one.
And I would say, like Maricela had alluded to earlier, we actually have a budgeted line item for our training, and 95% of the training that we send folks to is paid through that line item that's in our budget from the general fund.
Great.
Most of the vendors that we pay for training are going to be part of the list that is from Post, the academy. So they will be part of the mandated training that officers need to attend.
Great. The next question is asking for details on how the department spends its money. They requested detailed budget information and received only the publicly available 1-page summary.
I think like the other previous fiscal years, we can run this fiscal cycle budget through the city attorney's office, and as long as they're okay with us providing that to the steering committees, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay. Does APD have assets forfeiture data by race?
Not sure I'm following.
Captain McMullen, I saw you shaking your head.
I do not believe that we do. And if I'm paraphrasing the question, are they asking how much money we have received in forfeiture by the race of the person who forfeited the money? Is that the question?
Yes, or that their assets were
seized.
Taken.
Yeah. I don't believe we do, but I could be mistaken. I could look into it.
Okay. Next question is, APD states that Special Investigations Unit closed down in 2018. However, 609 Secret Fund indicated by the city charter, that the police chief will keep records of money received from the secret fund and distribute those funds directly to the sergeant in charge of special investigations. It further states that the special investigations unit shall regularly audit the special fund. How is the special fund being managed in compliance with the city charter?
Sarah, I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead.
Nope,
Somebody else going to answer that?
No, go ahead, sir. It's okay.
It's been repealed. That fund doesn't exist anymore. So it's a pretty straightforward answer. It is no longer part of the city charter. It was removed in 2008.
Okay. So if there was follow-up from the subcommittees with regards to that fund, we could get you additional information too. This question, I think, would be for you, Nancy. Does APD have any relationships with historically Black colleges and universities where they could potentially recruit additional Black officers?
We don't. We do try to do a lot of outreach to different colleges, but haven't specifically targeted, but certainly something that we are willing to add to the list. I think it's a great idea.
Great. Next question. Over time, as the number of patrol officers has gone down, has the department decreased the number of sectors that the city has split up into? I know we have 5, but has that changed with the number of patrol officers being reduced?
No, it is not.
Okay. And who makes the decision to allocate funding within the department? Is that the chief or the city manager?
To allocate funding to the police department, or the money that's in the police department to be
to allocate the police department's budget?
The city manager makes a recommendation to the city council in consultation, and the police department obviously puts forward their request as part of that process through the police chief. Hopefully that helps clarify the process. So the city council has the authority to approve the budget, and then once the budget is approved, resources can be moved within the police department up to certain amounts. If there are bigger changes happening, that would also come back to the city council for approval.
Great. And next question is, are police officers hourly employees, or are they salaried with some type of an exemption?
Most of our employees are hourly employees. When sworn police employees reach the rank of lieutenant, they become salaried employees. So we have 7 or 8 employees, or we can have 7 or 8 employees that are salaried employees from the sworn side. And then we do have a handful of professional staff, non-sworn employees that are also salaried. But most of them are hourly.
The next person writes, while it might be true that only a police officer can involuntarily detain and transport an individual, isn't it true that while some calls for mental health service result in a detention, others result in no action or referral to services or voluntary transport?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate, or
well,
the person? I was going to say, if the person asking the question wanted more information, they could enter more in the chat too.
Yeah, no, they're right. So again, one of those, you don't always know until you get there, and don't know how the call for service will end. I was pointing out that when you look at some of these things, you look at alternatives to police response, the law is one of those things that we have to take into consideration, because at least at this point, California law would not support a mental health professional in the field, a non-sworn person, making that detention. So they would eventually, in other words, they would eventually need a peace officer to respond to make that detention if it got to that point. So.
Okay. Next question we've touched on. This person is asking if we can get the details of staff, their rates of pay and salary and overtime hours. I believe that Nancy Bronstein, you said you would deliver that to the subcommittees.
Yeah, I can provide that. A lot of that information is available on the City of Alameda's website on the HR Human Resources page, but we'll also send it out.
Okay, great. Given the current budget situation, the fact that police force is doing a lot with a little, it seems that the most cost-effective way of dealing with many non-crime calls would be to implement a Cahoots-style program to bridge the gap. Is that something? I know we talked about Cahoots a little bit before. Are you doing additional research?
Yeah, that's actually, so it is part of what the steering committee and the subcommittees are working on, and we're certainly open to other models.
Great. How does APD handle internal affairs with regards to FTEs? Does the internal affairs officer report directly to the chief? And if not, do we have, if we do not have an internal affairs officer, do we fund that work by contract, or how is that work done?
So our inspectional services unit is staffed by a police sergeant, and they report directly to the chief through the Services Bureau, and they will handle a bulk of our complaints and investigations that come in. They can be outsourced from time to time. And that is a decision that's made on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, great. And I think City Manager had joined. City Manager Eric Levitt, did you want to speak? Are you? You should be good now.
Yeah, I answered 2 questions ago on the Cahoots model that the Cahoots model, or whether you look at through the fire department or other means for mental health and some of these types of calls and taking them out of police. While the committees are doing research, I'm also been communicating with Alameda County, because Alameda County has supervision and control over some of these types of activities, and trying to get more information that we can get to those committees, as well as have a better understanding from a city perspective of what we can and can't do within the laws of California.
Okay, great. Next question. If you had to cut your budget by 10% immediately, what would you cut and why?
That sounds like a police chief oral board question right there. As a principal, I like to say things like I try to use a scalpel and not a machete when it comes to budget reduction, because there's always a cost to these things, right? We know, and this is true of virtually every human organization, I guess maybe short of maybe NASA, that personnel are our most costly items. They're our most costly resource. So you end up looking at personnel first and foremost. But you have to be very careful, because wherever you cut, generally, we find that the reduction or the demand for service is not reduced just because we've cut a program or a person or what have you. So you have to do it very carefully. And for my personal style is to do it in a collaborative fashion as well, because you need to find out what is the goal. In this particular question, the goal seems to be just cut 10%, and then working with staff, how do we do so that minimally impacts, that we can mitigate the impacts to the organization, to the service we deliver. And that's how I go. I couldn't tell you. I'd be working very closely with Maricela, with probably Jerry and Nancy, as well as the captains, and figuring out where we would make those cuts.
Just for some numbers, 29 million of the $36 million budget is personnel related.
Okay, got it. Next question is asking for the city manager to answer this, or maybe Jerry, the assistant city manager. Do we have money in the budget to hire a certified crime analyst that's non-sworn?
Is Eric still on the call?
I'm on the call.
It's all about prior.
I'm on the
call. Go ahead.
we do not currently have in the budget a crime analyst position in the budget. That would be a consideration that we'd have to look at for the next budget. But when I got here and at this time, there's actually not a crime analyst currently position that's been authorized in the budget.
Okay. Another question that has come in, City Manager Eric Levitt, somebody has asked, how have lawsuits against the police department and payouts impacted the city budget, and how much in settlements have we paid in lawsuits in which APD has been involved? And I had responded per the city attorney that that's not information that we can share, but the person asking the question wanted to understand how that's not public information.
So, and that was the question. That was a question as far as
just within the budget.
I wasn't here for the initial question, so and I wasn't.
Oh no, I didn't ask it at the time because I was waiting to hear back from the city attorney. So the question was just how have the lawsuits against APD and no payouts impacted the city's budget and the APD's budget, because we've been talking about both budget and staffing.
Okay, I can so I'm guessing what the city attorney's talking about is specific cases and payouts of specific cases. That would be my guess. What I'll say is what we do is we do a calculation on our liability fund. And so this isn't specific just to Alameda, but this is within any city. We're self-funded for liability. And so what we do is we allocate budget costs to the different departments based on different factor points. And so a certain amount of the liability fund is pulled from the general fund, and i.e. the police department. But I have to defer to the city attorney's recommendation that we don't answer any specific questions on it at this time. It's something we can find out more from him and then get back to him at a later date.
Okay, and I think that the somebody from Alan Cohen from the city attorney's office is joining, but I don't see him yet. So I can ask him that question too when he gets on.
He's coming from the same meeting I just came.
Yeah, I know. So I'm just going to keep going until I see him on, and then I'll come back to that question. The next question is asking, are the sergeants in the same bargaining unit as the police officers?
Yes.
Okay.
That was yes for anyone that didn't hear, because he said on local.
Yeah. And then the next question is, how much money does one peace officer equal to the budget? I know Nancy, you were going to get back to this information, but is it around 250,000, not including overtime?
For a police officer specifically?
Correct. Yes.
It can range because a new officer is about 140,000, and then an officer who's been here a while, maybe topped out, who's got a different higher level of insurance, can be closer to 200.
Okay.
That's not including. Is that including pension costs?
That should include everything.
Okay.
That would be a brand new officer coming in at a little lower rate, and then that's more expensive.
Okay, so that does include benefits.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That would be fully loaded.
Alan Cohen, I think you're now on the line too from our city's attorney's office. Alan, we had a question come in asking how much have lost. This meeting has been about budgets and staffing, and with regards to budgets, a question came in to ask how much has lawsuits against the APD and payouts impacted the city's budget. How much in settlements has the city paid in lawsuits in which APD has been involved over the past 3 years? And I explained that that wasn't information that we could share, and we just wanted to have an explanation of why that is from you.
The main reason was I was not on the line, and I don't have those numbers available for you. I don't think that the settlements are indicative of future performance, but we do a quarterly report to council where we publish significant settlements over the previous quarter, and I can pull together that data and and send it to the committee. Off the top of my head, being having represented the police for the last 3 years, I don't think there are too many. There may be
So
two.
So Sarah, yeah, I think actually even expanding on what Alan said, a question on that, I guess I'm not sure where that question is coming from, because as long as you have a police department, you're always going to have a certain level of exposure as far as lawsuits. I mean, that I'm not saying anything that's not factual, that's just fact. Whether you have 10 officers or 1,000 officers, you're going to have a certain amount of liability with having a police department exposure. You always do, and definitely cases have definitely ramped up as far as exposure in probably the last 5 years, and I just know that from firsthand experience dealing with it even before I was in Alameda. So I need to understand. I think I'm not sure how much that's going to relate to the department as a overall, based on the fact that I think you're going to have a certain amount of exposure as long as you have a police department. Now, if you want to move that exposure, i.e. some cities contract out their police departments, then they pay through their contract for that exposure, but they don't actually take on that exposure at the city any longer.
And let me just correct my statement just real quickly. I said quarterly, they're actually biannually. But okay. Nonetheless, I should be able to pull that data together, and if the committee is so inclined, or if Eric's so inclined, we can forward it on.
Okay, and then I just wanted to make a clarification that they want the question posed about reporting out the budget and the actual spending level detail of those payouts and settlements. So it's not a legal issue, it's just that they want the budget amounts and the reporting out to be there.
And that's a complicated process. I mean, again, I'll have to talk with our risk management department. It's all about reserve setting, et cetera. But we're just going to have to get back to the committee with that information. It is not budgeted as far as the police department's budget. There's an allocation, but I'll let City Manager Levitt weigh in.
I'd agree. So what we could do is give. Yeah, I don't know if we can, how much we can do on that, because our liability fund encompasses all liability, not just police liability.
Right. It's not segregated by department.
Okay. So in terms of the payouts within the general budget and the spending detail, we have a liability fund, but it doesn't specifically say what the police department's piece
That's
was.
entirely correct, right? We have a general liability fund, which is adopted by the council every 2 years, according to the budget, and it is supposed to embrace all lawsuits, all liability lawsuits against the city. So it's not itemized by individual department.
So, okay. Yeah. So if the person wants to send you a more detailed question on it, or the committee, we can look at it and give a written response. I've dealt with liability. So what people may or may not know is our liability fund, we're self-funded. And so based on being self-funded, we fund a separate fund as if it's an insurance fund. So we sort of, it's a separate entity. It's under the city's control, but it is a separate entity, and we fund it. And then we have a cap, and then above that cap, we have another insurance company that comes in and pays out any amount over that cap.
Okay. And then that was actually the last question that came in. So I know you missed some of it, City Manager Eric Levitt, because you're at the Public Utilities Board meeting. I don't know if you have any follow-up remarks or concluding remarks. Otherwise, we'll turn things back over to Cheryl.
Hi. Well, that was quite an interesting evening. A lot of questions. I think that will sort of maybe group as a steering committee and maybe other subcommittees for some follow-up. I think there's a lot of good information out there. And I will just, on a point of privilege, I will say, I thought one of the questions was really about a reporting level of detail on budget, not necessarily on payouts, just on spending, right? Budget and spending. And this is public money. I don't think there's any legal sort of like approval or requirement that the city needs to gain in order to report out at budget and spending at a level of detail below what's published in the your adopted budget. I'm a budget professional. I'm actually one of the reviewers for GFOA, which City of Alameda has won one of the awards. I've been a budget reviewer for the past 10 years, so I'm quite familiar with budgets. Alan, you can push back on that if you like, but this is public money, and as members of the public, we have a right to know what the spending detail is. And I'm not talking about payouts, I'm talking about just your regular spending, like what you're buying. So with that, I would like to say thank you. This is our last in a series of the Speakers Bureaus, and I just really would like to thank Captain Emmett, Chief Fenn, Captain McMullen, Jerry, Lisa, Nancy. I'm looking like romper room, Miss Nancy, who used to say. And I'd like to thank Sarah and Eric and all the committee members, and see maybe if Al, who joined us a little bit after we started, if he has anything that he'd like to add.
Al, you should be able to unmute now. Yeah.
I just wanted to repeat what Cheryl said on thanking everyone, and just also reiterate the fact that I hope that this will be a place of many discussions that we can possibly, now that we know everybody, we can invite individuals to speak to the individual subcommittee, and that way get into a little bit more of the detail. And everyone has been very, very impressive and so knowledgeable and very kind to take the time to answer our questions. I wanted to say again that we appreciate it and look forward to continuing this working relationship.
I guess we ended on time, right?
Yeah.
With time
early.
to spare. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We've definitely learned a lot, and we've got a lot of information, I think, yet to get.
Yeah, it sounded like there's a lot more information to be coming your way as a result of this meeting. So we'll be in touch regarding that. Thank you, everybody, very much. We will post the recording up on the city's YouTube channel so you can watch it back. And as always, we're all here if you have any questions or need anything.
All right.